Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to come here. It's my first time in Romania and my first time in Bucharest. I'm really happy to be here and to tell you a little bit about GAIN. When you were kids, your parents probably told you that you can be anyone you want when you grow up. But that's not entirely true. It's called identity theft. You can't be anyone you want to be. You can't steal someone else's identity. Because if you do, that creates a problem. It creates a problem that might be used for money laundering, that might be used for fraud. And even though the internet has been around for quite some time, we're still in a situation where proving your identity is quite hard. Earlier this year, something remarkable happened. Something that most people told us will be completely impossible. Over 100 experts in the identity field got together. Over 150 people from competing banks, from competing organizations in many countries, in 4 continents, and they wrote a paper together, a paper that argued for international collaboration to create a global assured identity network, a global system that would allow people to prove who they are. There were no logos. So these people came from some of the world's largest banks, some of the world's largest software companies, and yet when you look at the GAIN paper, there is not a single logo. Because everyone who contributed because it is a topic that was near and dear to their heart. It's something that they really wanted to see. It was also completely pro bono. We were working together for 6 months, and there was not a single cent, not a single lie changing hands. It was completely pro bono. The reason why we called it GAIN was because we wanted this to be global from the start. Not something that was dominated by the European Union or the United States of America or China or India, but something that would allow everyone around the world to come together and to create something jointly. We wanted to address 3 key topics. The first one is necessary for anything to be sustainable in the long run, and that is a business model. If you don't have a business model, you're not creating something that is sustainable. So a reason why. The second was to create the rules, something that would allow interoperability beyond countries because we would harmonize rules. And the third is technology. You can't have a global network if you don't have global technical interoperability. Now, when you talk about standardization, there is an old joke. And that joke is that you have a situation where you have many different standards, and you have a few people who say, this is not really working well. We can't be in a world with 14 different standards. We should create one standard to unite all the existing standards that we have. And of course, very often, you end up with simply yet another standard. So from the get-go, everyone felt that it was really important to ensure that GAIN itself would not create yet another standard, but it would work with the standards that already exist. So GAIN is trying to build on what's built today. It is not trying to create a new organization that is going to compete with the other organizations in this space, but it is essentially a forum. It's the embodied spirit of existing organizations to work together and to cooperate with the goal of creating a global interoperable standard. And we're really happy that some of the world's largest non-profit organizations in this space got together and decided to do this collectively. The Open Identity Foundation. You probably haven't heard of it if you're not an identity expert, but you very likely used standards that the OpenID Foundation created. Whenever you use Google to log in for another app or another website, for instance, you're using a standard called OpenID Connect. The Cloud Signature Consortium, an organization that was originally spearheaded by Adobe, but now a lot of the world's largest trust service providers are behind the Cloud Signature Consortium standard. It's a global standard to create electronic signatures. The Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, which is behind the G20 standard called LEI, the Legal Entity Identifier. The Open Identity Exchange, which is trying to standardize trust levels, and the IIF. If you think about most of the world's top banks and insurance companies, they are part, very likely, of the IIF. And it's pretty remarkable that all of these organizations are working together, and none of them is in the lead. There is no official chairman, there is no president, there is no office of GAIN. GAIN is simply the cooperation of those organizations. And we're in discussions with a number of additional partners. You see some of them here on this slide. And we hope to announce new GAIN partners very soon. So what's the hypothesis? What is the basis of GAIN? It is global interoperability. It's the idea that we can all work together in a system that is completely harmonized. And when you think back, and I see some faces here that are probably too young to think back all the way, but when you think back at the beginning of the internet, there was trust. I'm old enough to remember an internet where there were just a few organizations. You know, originally it was universities and a few government agencies. And if you received an email, you could be absolutely certain that that name was true because it was just a very small, very familiar electronic backyard. And then something wonderful happened. The internet grew and it grew and it grew. And with that growth came problems. Today, it is very hard to be certain that you know the person that you are dealing with. So along the way, we lost trust. And the question is, how can we regain the trust we lost? The way GAIN wants to do that is, again, to build on what's built today. There are pockets of trust on the internet today. There are networks today that allow you to prove who you are. Some of the first of these islands of trust happened in Scandinavia, or to be more concrete, in Sweden. The banks in Sweden got together and they created a system called Bank ID. And Bank ID allows you to prove your identity simply using the online banking credentials or the mobile apps that you already have. It's a very simple system. You use the banks as trust anchors to build a relationship on the internet with people that you don't know. Today, Bank ID is not alone. In many countries, you have Bank ID-like networks. There's another one also called Bank ID in Norway. There is a system in Belgium called It's Me. There is Aadhaar in India, an identity network that spans 1.3 billion people. The idea of GAIN is not to compete with Bank ID or to compete with Aadhaar, but the idea is to create a layer of interoperability that allows all of those networks to function together as a cohesive system. So what is GAIN? It's a collaboration of 154 authors. They came from banks like Access Bank, the largest bank in Africa, JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, NatWest, the Commonwealth Bank, HSBC, Santander, Bank ID in Sweden, Bank ID in Norway, It's Me in Belgium. Companies like Akoya, which is a joint venture of US banks to create a joint aggregator, but also representatives of software companies like Adobe, for instance, or DocuSign in the electronic signature space. And the idea was to lay out exactly how such a global system could work. I already mentioned that GAIN is not trying to become an organization, because there is not invented here syndrome, not just in the commercial world, but also in the world of non-profits. So if there was a GAIN organization, it's very likely that there would be another organization that would say, GAIN is competing with me. I am the OpenID Foundation, I'm the Open Identity Exchange. If they're trying to create identity standards, then that is a competitive effort. So we see GAIN really as the overlap of existing organizations working together to create this global assured network. And when we call this a forum, what we mean is something a little like the G7 or the G20. When you think about it, it's remarkable that there is no office or no chairman of the G7. It's one of the most powerful organizations in the world, yet it is an incredibly ephemeral thing without a formal office building or without a boss. It is the cooperation of 7 or 20 countries who want to achieve something together. And that's the same thing we're trying to do here. What you see here is the roadmap of the GAIN initiative, and it's a very ambitious roadmap. We already launched the GAIN paper together with the IIF, and we want to commercialize GAIN and to turn it into an actual product, something that you can really use in as many countries as possible already next year. We are working together with the OpenID Foundation on the GAIN POC, the proof of concept that will basically demonstrate technical interoperability. And we're also working on the GAIN community POC, which is essentially going to create the participation agreement and the legal underpinnings for this system to work. The goal is to have a viable, at least a minimum viable system already next year. What you see here is the setup, the structure of the GAIN network. The OpenID Foundation is playing an important role. They are the guardians of the OpenID standard, and the OpenID Connect for Identity Assurance standard is the technical foundation that we're using for the Global Assured Interoperability Network. And they're going to bring a number of critical components to the table. For instance, a directory. If you are interested in a global system, you have to have something like a phone book, right? You have to have something that says, is Citibank really Citibank? Or is this just someone pretending to be Citibank? If you have a relying party like Adobe, the question is Adobe really Adobe? Or maybe just a company that claims to be Adobe? So the directory is important. The chooser is important, that allows you as a consumer to choose the bank that you're interested in. There are a lot more components, of course, on the technical side, but equally important, you have non-technical areas that you need to address, not just the tools, but also the rules. Things like governance, who should be in charge? Who can you go to if there is a problem with this network? Is there a trust mark? Is there something like the MasterCard logo or the Visa logo that allows you as a customer to trust that the relying party or the identity provider that you are dealing with is actually who they claim to be? Rules for dispute resolution, for instance, right? So there is a lot of interoperability that needs to happen, not just for the tools, but also for the rules. And then we believe that there need to be service providers. So let's assume you have a global system made up of financial institutions and maybe telecommunications companies to provide the identity. What you want is that the system works seamlessly with signatures. Most banks are not trust service providers, so you want a system where these service providers can work seamlessly with the banks and the financial institutions that are building the trust element. And then, of course, we believe that there is a great opportunity for fintechs, for tech companies that are going to offer technical solutions to the global assured identity network. There was already, after the white paper, a first, we call it the alpha POC, the alpha proof of concept, where companies were so excited that they started ad hoc to work together and say, let's prove this out. Let's demonstrate that we can actually do this today and that we can create such an interoperable network. BankID Sweden was part of this system. As I said, they were the pioneers in Sweden, in Scandinavia, creating such a network. Akoya is part of this. Akoya is the joint venture of the largest banks in the United States of America, and they're interested as well. A company called Crypto, which is a tech company that is bringing a lot of providers together. Disme, which is part of InfoCert, a large trust service provider. SecureKey, which is the company behind Verify.me, which is the Canadian global identity standard, and the German banks as well, who are participating via yes.com. This is an invitation to anyone here in the room, to anyone who might be listening to this. If you're interested in this space, join this POC. There will be a lot more companies that we will be able to announce shortly, and we're very excited in the technical POC. What we're trying to show here is interoperability. All of these entities here, like BankID in Sweden, are going to continue to do what they're doing. Gain is not going to compete with them. Gain is not trying to replace them. But Gain will allow any developer to make one integration and receive data from Sweden, from Germany, from the United States, from Canada. One integration, one contract. On the relying party side, on the side of companies that are going to use this data, we already have a couple of companies like Adobe, like UniverSign, like the Intesi Group, DocuSign just recently joined. So we're quite confident that this is going to be a successful two-sided market. 2022 is going to be a very important year for this initiative. We hope that 2022 will be the year where we are gaining something together. The Alpha POC is going to lead to the OpenID Connect and Open Identity Exchange proof of concept. We are working on the major infrastructure components like the IDP chooser, the directory that I have mentioned, the trust framework. So what does it mean if a bank in Germany or a bank in Romania say that this is a certain customer? What is the difference between the anti-money laundering laws in Romania and in Germany? Can a Romanian company trust if a German bank is saying this is actually John Smith? The Romanian developer needs to understand about the German KYC and AML laws. And the same is true in the US, right? Can someone in the US trust in the Romanian AML? There are a lot of interesting regulatory questions to create such a system on a global basis. Key events next year. We are going to start already in the fourth quarter of this year, before Christmas, with workshops. We very much hope that Banking 4.0 is going to be on this roadmap as well. We would love to give you an update next year. We're going to present at some of the most important conferences our progress next year, and we are really advertising and asking everyone at these conferences to join and to become part of the global network. The community group POC is going to be established early next year, already in January. It is governed by a neutral participation agreement. This agreement is not owned by any one company or any one organization. It's essentially a living document that we are using together in order to be as inclusive as possible without anyone owning gain. The scope of those POCs, the targets, the goals of those POCs, everything is agreed by the group, which to me is not just interesting because I love digital identity, but because it's an experiment in radical democracy. It's an experiment in organizations and individuals coming together to create something jointly without anyone who is boss. The roadmap will be agreed as well by the participants in January. So all of the very concrete goals and the launch dates should be ready and available as of January next year. And we're going to formalize the collaboration and the cooperation with the other organizations that I mentioned. We have 4 co-chairs. They come from the open source community. They come from the community that is building the standards that most of us are using every day. Thorsten Lodderstedt is the co-chairman of the eKYC working group of the OpenID Foundation, together with Mark Hain. Joseph Heenan is responsible for all of the interoperability testing, and Dima Postnikov is the leading figure in the identity space, in our opinion, in Australia. He contributed a lot to the standards that you know today. This slide looks very innocuous, but it's an important message in our opinion. Data privacy is not a sexy topic. It's not something that most people wake up and say, let's discuss data privacy today. But it's a really, really crucial issue. Your data is incredibly important. If you're not careful, your data can be used either to imposter you or to blackmail or to greenmail you. Data privacy is key. And GAIN is trying to maximize privacy and to minimize the attack surface of someone who isn't really a benevolent actor. And the way we're doing this is by creating direct connections. There is no GAIN organization or no GAIN company in the middle. If you are thinking of an organization that is a bank that is providing this data, and you're thinking of Adobe as the company that might be interested to receive the data, what you see here on this slide is that there is no one in the middle. The data flows directly from the provider of the data to the company that the end user designates as the recipient of the data. There is no GAIN organization that could either be malicious or just plain stupid that is losing that data, because the connection is always direct. But in order for this direct connection to exist, you need to harmonize the tools and the rules. You need to make sure that every provider in the network is providing data over the same APIs using the same data formats, and that you can, with one integration and with one contract, interact with every provider in the system. We believe this is really crucial in order to create a network that both preserves privacy and enhances security as much as possible. A couple of the non-technical requirements that we're going to look at for next year. One, I already mentioned, we call it the assurance level mapping. And that really is the question of, can you trust someone else's rules? So if you have a relying party in the US and you have a Romanian bank that is providing the identity of someone who happens to be Romanian but is in the US at the moment, can the company in the US trust in the framework that you're using here in Romania? And the same, of course, is true the other way around. Can you in Romania trust if someone is using an American bank to prove their identity? You have to map the assurance levels. You have to map the requirements. You have to understand what it means to be KYC compliant in different countries. We're going to discuss the trust mark, the principles, the governance structures, all of the legal and the regulatory requirements, the scheme requirements. All of those things are going to be addressed next year. This is a monumental task. It's not something that you can do in one meeting and then you say, we mapped all the KYC laws of the world and we end up with a delta analysis. But we believe it's important to start this and really implement it as part of a global network. And we believe that this should be done in cooperation with organizations like the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation, with the G7, with the G20, who are very interested in this topic as well. This is probably not a good slide for a presentation in this forum because there's a lot of information on it. So the main takeaway, I guess, from this slide is there is a lot to do. We think that we know at least what the areas are that need to be tackled, and they are going to be discussed as of January. I already mentioned that this is an invitation. GAIN is only as good as the people and the organizations that are behind GAIN. It is really a community effort. It is something that we either do together to create a global network, or a few big companies, an oligopoly in big tech, is going to do this alone. And we hope that there is an opportunity where everyone is welcome. Financial institutions, telecommunication companies, big tech companies, large schemes that exist already today, that we're working together and we create a level playing field and something that is going to bring back trust to the internet. Thank you very much.